Mnandi Nyembe is 74 years old. She's a legend of our screens, has been in the business for over 50 years, and she finds herself wheelchair bound in ill health. And she said, look, I've done all the right things. I never thought I would be in this situation, but because of my failing health and other family responsibilities, I have had to spend my savings on those, and now I'm down and out. And she asked the public for assistance. Many South Africans put their hands up and have assisted, and she's since, in fact, sent another message of thanks to all those who have helped. But it's a movie we have seen before. You may remember when we had Carlo Hadebe, the former actor, on backstage in the studio, who was telling us about his tough life since no longer having that role. But there are others, Vusi Tanda, Roderick Jafta. What goes wrong with this industry? Why is it stars, names that should be revered, find themselves in this situation? We've seen it with musicians as well, and not just actors. Today we'll focus on the acting industry. We're joined in studio by a legend himself, Jack Devnarain. He's a South African actor, but also the chairperson of the South African Guild of Actors. Jack, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time, and thank you for popping into the studio.
Thank you. I think the conversation is big enough that I felt I had to be here.
So let's take Nandi Nyembe, who's our entry point into this story. Right now, she's in fact part of a hit series on Showmax that's currently streaming. And I understand how the industry works, that often things are broadcast much later than they were shot, and by that time, the actors have been paid. But it's just there's such a big disconnect between public perception and what actors really deal with.
And I think this is how we correct that public perception. We need to make it generally known amongst all South African people that the structure of the industry itself is flawed. The inequalities are baked into it, so that it's not what you're seeing with Mamnandi is not an anomaly. This is normal. This is our everyday, and there but for the grace of God go I.
So where does it go wrong? Is it that the broadcasters give production companies too little money and they have to eke out every cent to make the production happen, and therefore pay the performers poorly and the crew poorly? Is it that the production companies in fact keep all the money for themselves? Or is it that making television in South Africa is simply not that profitable?
It's not so much about the budgets, but yes, you're right, that is a factor. Budgets have been falling year on year. But more importantly, it is the residual income that should be coming to performers. Every time that series is licensed to another broadcaster, it's put onto a streaming platform, it's licensed to some, another territory. Every time that happens is when the actor should incur a residual income. That's actually what our retirement plan is. And it's something that South African actors specifically are being denied. We are being denied that by industry bodies, by broadcasters, by producers. We are being denied that even by legislation, which is why, if you go back to a previous conversation we had about why the copyright bill and royalty rights are so important to us. So even if the budget was fantastic and Mam Nandi got a fantastic payout, she got, let's put a figure to it, 100,000 rand to work over 2 or 3 months. It's the fact that that money is going to run out, and if she doesn't work over the next 4, 5, 6 years, and it's gone, and there's nothing that can be coming out of it.
100,000 rand is being very generous there as an estimate, but there are agent fees to be paid. If she's going to be going on any kind of press junket, she has to look a certain way.
Yep.
There are makeup artists to be paid. There are stylists to be paid. There are hairdressers to be paid. There are transport costs. It's a whole, it's a business.
Correct.
You are your business as an actor.
We've got to be living life as well. So all those costs as a freelancer fall to the actor to have to manage. And in fact, there is a myth as well. Let's address it while we're having this conversation. There's the myth that freelance performers are really bad and irresponsible with money, poorly trained in managing business. That is the furthest thing from the truth. Freelancers are exceptionally good because we know the precarity of our work means that money is irregular, work is irregular. We cannot bank on the prospect of some job happening tomorrow. So we're exceptionally responsible with our money now. You are less likely to find freelancers opening accounts at clothing outlets and less likely for people to be running up huge expenses because we know we can't guarantee tomorrow.
And in fact, you probably might not even get that line of credit exactly for that reason.
You never get credit anyway.
But Jack, let's talk about, you've done many things in your career, of course, and I don't want to reduce it just to Isidingo, but I think it's a very practical example because particularly the format of that show means it can be sold to other jurisdictions and often years after it was made. So we very likely could see a scenario where years later, all of you who participated in that production being famous, in a big country like Brazil or India, and getting absolutely nothing from it, whilst, of course, the broadcaster would rake in millions.
That's true. And in fact, the SABC is an exception because the SABC has decided when they drafted the actors' contract, they built in what's called a commercial exploitation fee. Now, in principle, that means that the series can be sold and it can be viewed around the world, and I will then get a 2% share of whatever that licensing deal was, and it'll be shared amongst the principal cast. Now, the reason this is different from a royalty is that the commercial exploitation fee sits only in that contract. And if that contract has to change, and SABC is already considering redrafting their contract, the reality is that MultiChoice, for example, the Mnet contracts are completely different. And they don't have that commercial exploitation fee. We need to establish a baseline royalty right that no matter what show you do, that right is always built in. And that's how it exists in most countries around the world, especially where they have collective bargaining rights and the recognition of our rights as actors, as workers protected under labor laws.
You are chairperson of the South African Guild of Actors. How much muscle do you have?
Very little. Precisely because we don't have collective bargaining rights. The reason we had to form a guild is because as freelancers, we are not protected under the Labour Relations Act. It means we cannot form a union. And that question keeps coming up. And it's another huge question you would have seen quite often on social media. Why don't you guys just form a union? It'll be so much easier. Please stop. Let's just go through the law. The Labour Relations Act makes provision for employees to join a union, to create a union, to participate in union activities, to go ahead and set standardized rates, benchmarked rates and contracts. You can do that in a process called collective bargaining. That's the kind of thing that, your big unions are doing under the COSATU banner, for example. But as a freelancer, we are excluded under the Labour Relations Act. We are therefore excluded from creating a union.
So what happened to all the moves to try and protect actors, to try and ensure that you would have those royalty fees due to you? That legislation has sort of been shelved and it's just sitting?
Well, it seemed that there was a concerted effort to derail those bills that was contained in the Copyright Amendment Bill. And it was linked to the Performers Protection Amendment Bill. It went into Parliament in 2017. And since 2017, political parties basically turned it into a football that just kept getting kicked around. And it was being kicked around for 7 years, in fact, because every time Parliament, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces had approved the bills, it arrived on the president's desk and he did everything in his power to delay what was going to happen next. He refused to sign them. And in fact, the process went around Parliament twice until on the 29th of February last year, the bills were finally approved. It arrived on the president's desk and he sat on it again for months until he was left with no other option but to refer it to the Constitutional Court. Coming up on the 20th of May, we're going to have that hearing, and we are so relieved that finally, if our executive cannot make a decision, if our legislature is not being supported, then the justice system must take over and serve us in the context of our constitution.
So when you hear politicians crying at the funeral of a former television star, an actor who has passed away, who fell on hard times in their twilight years, are those crocodile tears for you?
Absolutely. It's showmanship. It's grandstanding. It's self-serving. It's insulting. And it robs the actor who dedicated their lives to the craft. It robs them of their dignity.
What pressure would you like the public to bring to bear on this?
People must appreciate that we have to be seen as workers, protected under labor laws. This is an industry. It's not a pastime. We spend our lives working in places like studios and theaters and making film. Our work is being seen and we are respected performers around the world. And if I would ask for anything, it's that people should join the cause and support Saga's efforts in bringing formality into the sector and the recognition of our rights as workers.
What's the resistance? Because what you're saying sounds perfectly reasonable.
We would love to know where the resistance is, and that's what we want to ask the broadcasters and the producer bodies, because every time the conversation comes up about regulation and protection of our rights, they are the ones that specifically stand up to say, we object. And we want to know why.
Personally, have you had any pushback because you are now the voice of all of this? How busy are you?
I have more time for activism now than I've ever had.
The scripts aren't coming.
No. I last worked in September last year.
Doesn't that tell the whole story? How are you coping? How are you surviving?
I look at Mam Nandi and I think whatever my situation is, there are others who have it worse.
You've put your family, your life on the line for this.
I think there are people who made far greater sacrifices on our journey, to liberation as a country. When I look at what we intend to do and to bring about a revolution in the creative sector, I think there are those who may have to make sacrifices as well.
Jack Devnarain, the actor and the chairperson of the South African Guild of Actors. Thank you for coming in.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.